Welcome back to another episode of the Quisha King Show. I am your host, Quisha King, and today we have a very special guest. He is the National Director of Research at the American Federation for Children, the Executive Director at Educational Freedom Institute, an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and a senior fellow at Reason Foundation. He was named the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for his work on education policy and received the Buckley Award from America's Future in 2020. Welcome, Corey DeAngelis.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to join you today and talk about education policy and whatever else is going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It is truly an honor to speak with you. We met back in DC at Freedom Works, and everyone was vying for your attention. And clearly, from your intro, we can certainly see why. From your bio, we can certainly see why. So I want to kind of give people a little bit more background, not just your work, but like, where are you from? Where do you hail from?
Yeah, so I live in the swamp in DC, but I've only lived here for about 4 years. Before that, I grew up in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
And it was actually I actually just got back from Houston for an event out there. It was a Pastors for Parental Empowerment event, getting people excited about school choice, or what I refer to as funding students as opposed to systems. Right. But I grew up in Texas. I actually attended government-run schools for 13 years, all through K through 12. But in high school, I had the opportunity to go to a magnet school, which is a school of choice. It's still run by the district or the government, but you're not residentially assigned to magnet schools. It's right. They kind of have an incentive to cater to the needs of customers so they can attract people to come to their school. So that's kind of how I first got into this. And then I started I did my bachelor's and master's in economics, which really opened my mind to the problems with the school system. And then I did my PH.D. at the University of Arkansas, where I started studying the effects of these programs that allow the money to follow the child.
Wow. Very cool. I'm like half Southern, half Northern. So I was raised in Lake City, Florida up until I was 13. And then my family moved to Connecticut. So totally different. I also went to public school my entire school career, but my youngest daughter has been in private since for about 4 years. And my oldest did a magnet school, her junior high. She was at like a school of the arts, which is, it does have a focus, but when it's an art school, it's a lot of funny stuff that goes on in these artsy fartsy schools. So yeah, I think parents would be really shocked to see what their kids are doing outside of, the education portion.
Well, that's cool. So you've been to 2 states that are very different with their degrees of education freedom, as I would like to call it. Florida is one of the states that's leading the way. And this year they just expanded their existing programs more than ever. It's the biggest expansion of school choice in the nation's history this year in Florida, just based on raw numbers. Right. And Connecticut doesn't have any programs that allow the money to follow the child to a private school, at least. And neither does Texas, where I grew up.
I know.
Which is interesting.
I found that so fascinating. I was actually thinking of moving to Texas at one point. And the reason why I did not go there was because they had no school choice. I was like, I can't move there. Like, what? I'm not going to go and fight a whole nother system. Forget that.
It's one of those states where, it's like, why haven't we cracked, gotten this figured out in Texas yet? The unions have a lot of sway in rural areas, or at least the superintendents in the districts. And so you have some politicians listening to them instead of the parents. But, San Antonio, Texas actually had a private school voucher program. I think it was privately funded, though, between 1998 and 2008. And the evaluation of that program found that, actually made the public schools better from competition. They actually had to up their game in response to that pressure. And the students using the program didn't do any worse either. So, when the superintendent groups come out and try to say this is going to destroy the world, I mean, that didn't happen in Florida. The schools have gotten way better. They went from the middle of the pack to the top of the pack in the span of like a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Over the time that they've expanded educational freedom in Florida. And in Texas, the sky didn't, the public schools didn't get worse. They got better as well.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you and I know this, like this only helps our nation, giving parents more options, getting children outside of that one size fits all education. Even when I moved at 13, when I moved from Florida to Connecticut back then, I was behind. Connecticut actually had their education system was better at the time. I don't know. I mean, that was quite some time ago, but I don't know what it would be. I would think, and I should probably look this up. I would think that Florida is probably doing much better in educating children these days. But back then, it was better. But things have crumbled in our country so fast. It's like lightning speed. It's hard to wrap your head around how things have, gone downhill. But thanks to people like you and the work that you're doing in education, we can certainly see changes. So what was it that made you want to even get involved in this crazy space of work?
Yeah. So one, I attended that magnet school, which I think had a positive impact on my life trajectory. And I'd like to extend those kinds of opportunities in education to other families as well. And it shouldn't be limited to a government-run magnet school, though. You should be able to take your kids' education dollars to wherever you get an education that works for them and that aligns with your family's values. That could be another public school. It could be a charter school. It could be a private school. It could even be some type of homeschooling option, like a micro school or pandemic pod. Or maybe you want to use your kids' education dollars for a private tutor, for example. The money should follow the child to whatever situation works best for them. And when I started studying economics, all of this became much more clear that the problem with K-12 education in America is this massive power imbalance between the government school monopoly and individual families. And we've seen that this past year and a half more than ever, where this, it's one thing for the schools to do a bad job educating your kids and then still to receive your money, regardless of how well they do. But over the past year and a half, we saw in so many places that they kept the money, even though they weren't even opening their doors for business, while the private schools were open essentially the whole time, and families were stuck scrambling. And now I think families are figuring out that there isn't any good reason to fund the failing closed institutions when you can give the money directly to the parents instead, so that the schools have a true incentive to meet their needs. So that, doing my degrees in economics kind of opened my eyes a little bit to that just quite a bit ago. And then when I started studying the programs during my PhD, I became more and more interested in it. Just my first study, for example, linked the Milwaukee voucher program, which has been around for about 3 decades now, to a reduction in criminal activity for those students. We also later found in a follow-up study, it was associated with a reduction in paternity suits at the same time, which could be associated with teenage pregnancies, which other school choice studies have found as well. There's actually 6 studies now on the topic, all peer-reviewed, finding that school choice generally leads to a reduction in crime. Why is that? Well, it's because schools have multiple dimensions of quality. They could increase test scores. That's one thing that they can do, but they can also improve the character development of the student, and they can have a better environment, a safer environment for the kid. The kid could be more interested in what they're learning and how they're learning the material in a particular school that best fits, is a better match for them, which could mean that they're more likely to finish high school and graduate, and obviously be less likely to commit crimes later on in life. And so there's 6 studies on that topic now. And that just looking at these kind of non-test score outcomes started to make me even more and more interested in this topic, because look, parents care about their kids more than anyone else, and they care about a lot more than just standardized test scores. So they pick schools based on so many different metrics that could have a lot of positive impacts that can't be captured by a standardized test score.
That is so true. I know I do see there are some websites out there, like when you're starting to look for schools or where to send your kid, they're starting to include more of those other things, like the crime in the area, or the, it's not just like the curriculum and the who's passing and the test scores. They are starting to include more of those things, because I mean, when you move somewhere, when you're thinking about starting a family, that is the very first thing that you want to know. Is my kid going to be able to get a good education here? And you want some type of idea of what type of environment that they're going to be in when they're in that classroom. So I know a lot of times, parents will look at crime, because I think in most of our minds, we're thinking, if there's a lot of crime in the neighborhood, then maybe the kids are going to be, maybe they're not criminals probably, but what are they doing in the classroom that could cause distractions so kids can't learn, or not, maybe not can't learn, but actually, yes, where they can't learn because they can't focus. The teacher is spending so much time disciplining the child, other children, where they can't even teach. I went to go see my youngest daughter when she was in my oldest daughter. I had tested out this academy, and I sat in there for a day, and the teacher could not teach. She spent the entire classroom disciplining. It was one kid. It's like, take the child, send him to the principal's office, and get back to the business of what we're paying you to do. But I don't even think you can do that anymore, because a lot of these, these teachers unions, these outside interest groups, they've implemented all types of nonsense like restorative justice, where the kid can just destroy the class. They can disrupt the class, and there's no consequences. Do you think that that's from, where do you think, is that from teachers unions? Is it, am I right on that?
I mean, yeah, that could be part of it. I think that had something to do with the Obama letter to on disproportionate impacts of discipline policies, which could lead to lower disciplinary enforcement across the board. And I think Max Eden has written a lot on this. He's at AEI, but he has a book with Andrew Pollack called "Why Meadow Died," and they make the case that the park.
Why Meadow died?
Why Meadow died. Meadow was the daughter of Max Eden's co-author Andrew Pollack, who he was actually father of one of the victims in the Parkland school shooting, and they linked the school disciplinary policies and just so many failures of government red tape to this incident. And one of the things they cite is that Dear Colleague letter from the Obama administration, essentially incentivizing schools to not discipline students. And so there's all these types of unintended effects. I don't think anybody had, no one wanted any of these things to happen, but, another one of the unintended effects is that, well, if you can't discipline the kid for disrupting the classroom, well, then the other kids can't learn as much at the same time. So there's all sorts of these kinds of issues. It could be that the teachers unions lobby for these kinds of lax discipline policies as well. And I think the incentive for them to do so would be so that the teachers could just raise their hand and say, I'm not going to be an enforcer of disciplinary policy. And use that. They can use that as an argument for why they're doing a bad job on standardized tests. I'd have to look more into that. But teachers unions have really showed their true colors over the past year and a half, especially in that they've pushed to keep the schools closed for so long, which did a lot of harm to kids. And it inadvertently helped us, though, when it comes to fighting for parental rights because parents woke up and they're not going to forget what happened over the past year and a half. They don't want to feel powerless ever again like they felt in 2020.
Absolutely not. And on top of that, the teachers unions were still they were still getting paid. The teachers were still getting paid, and then they got this other, like they got the COVID money, which was like more money to the schools for doing a bad job. It's like, can you like nowhere in America does an institution function like this? You can fail and still get like top dollar. It's like
it's my old maxim that underperforming private schools shut down, underperforming government schools get more money. I mean, we've seen this over time because they can say, look, we're failing because we don't have enough money. In a private school, you fail, well, then the parents vote with their feet and then you shut down. So the incentives are completely backwards in the current government-run school system. And we saw it with COVID too, because it wasn't just that the school employees knew and the unions knew that they could keep their benefits the same without having to go into the classrooms and to have the commute time, have to do the childcare responsibilities. Yep. It's that they understood that they could profit from doing so. They knew that they could hold kids' education hostage for as long as possible, because when they do that, they knew that they weren't going to lose any money, but in fact, they could use that state of disorder as leverage. Gives them a better bargaining position at the bargaining table to say, look, we can't open because, we need more money. And so It worked. They got $190 billion from the federal government. In addition to we're already spending over $15,000 per kid. This worked out to be a bonus of like $3,000 to $4,000 per kid in the government school system at a time where they're losing student enrollment. I mean, look at Los Angeles public schools. Yeah. Their budget numbers for 2022 suggest that they're going to increase per pupil education spending by 69% since 2019. 69%. And so you ask yourself, well, where are they going to put the money? District officials laid out a plan. They're losing 6% of their customer base. Their enrollment dropped by 6%, but they're planning to increase teacher staffing by 8%. And to increase custodial staffing by 25%, and to increase psychological and social workers by 80%. In what other industry do you lose 6% of your customers and you just put more and more people into the building while getting more funding from the government? Oh, yeah. It's just backwards.
It is so backwards. I mean, I personally think that it is intentional. I think that their goal is much more sinister than what we actually want to realize when they are going to increase you said psychologists by 80%,
social workers, psychological social workers,
this social emotional learning, I think there is a concerted effort for the kids that remain in these public schools. They are really going to push this equity, this idea of, equal outcomes and, lessening, the criteria to pass. Even here in Duval County, it's a joke. We have our graduation rates have like increased to, I think they were like in the 75%, 80% to like 95%. But then when you go and look at the proficiency in math and reading core subjects, the kids cannot read. They can't do math at graduating levels. It is, and this is not all of Florida, because Florida is doing a better job. But I think a lot of that are the choice schools, the magnet schools, the homeschooling. I think we're helping to add to those numbers when we look at Florida education as a whole. But when you look at the public schools, it's like, who the heck are you graduating? Because they are not prepared to go into anybody's institution to learn, like, your first level, as a freshman in college. You are not ready at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, this reminds me of Oregon, where they just passed a law the governor signed that you don't have to read or write to graduate from high school anymore in Oregon. It's kind of like, well,
Corey,
and what's the point?
up.
What's the point? Yeah, they just signed this into law. Maybe it was this year. It was probably a couple of months ago by now.
Wait a minute. Wait. They said that you don't have to read or write to graduate?
Nope. No longer a requirement to graduate in Oregon because of equity. They said it was because instead of raising standards and doing a better job, they said, okay, let's lower the bar for everyone. It's just so stupid. I mean, there's two ways to fix an equity gap. One way is to just pass everybody through, which is what they chose. It's the easier job for the teachers. The other way is to do a better job.
Yeah.
And one way to do that would be to give the money to the parents so that the schools have to do a better job.
Yeah. They don't care about that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I had to grab some water. But I mean,
we can edit that part out anyway.
Oh no, that's all good. But this also, reminds me of another reason why the teachers unions are going to lose in the long run, especially after this year. One, they showed their true colors with the school reopening stuff, and they didn't want to go back to work. Not because the people were bad or evil, not because the teachers themselves had a problem with them. I think it was just a problem with the system, that the incentive structure was all backwards. It's not the people's fault, it's the system's fault. And we got to fix the system by giving the money to the parents as opposed to the system, so that the system and schools have an incentive to cater to the needs of the parents as opposed to the other way around.
Right.
But the silver lining with the remote instruction was that parents got to see what was going on in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And so like we talked about how quality of a school is multidimensional, right? Like some of that's captured in the test score. And I think before this year, a lot of parents might have been in a school that had like an A rating from the state, or maybe they had pretty good test scores for their kids.
Yeah.
And so they thought they were in a good place and they didn't have to worry about what was going on.
Yep.
But then they started to realize that I'm missing part of the picture here, that my values are not captured in that state rating.
Right.
And so if you're teaching my kid this, comprehensive sex education stuff, or if you're introducing other types of political bias in the classroom, I could be in a good school that actually isn't as good as I thought it was, based on my alignment with my values.
Yeah. It was like COVID has been in the education world, parental rights world, and just parents as a whole. I think for the nation, it has been such I hate to say, with all the death and everything, it turned out to be something that I don't think that they meant for it to ever be. When they said that we were sending your kids home and, we were just going to teach from the beach and kick our feet up. And we didn't think, we were going to keep this thing going as long as we possibly could. It turned out when parents were like, wait a minute, what did they just say on what did your teacher just say? When we heard that, we were like, oh, heck no, like, what is this? What is this? Stop now. And, as much as we hate COVID, this has been such a good thing that has come out so parents can actually get re-engaged in their child's education. And most of us probably thought that we were engaged, because I certainly thought I was an engaged parent. I'm looking at homework. I'm in communication with your teachers and I'm doing these things. But when there was a segregated assembly planned here in my county, like,
come on,
how did that happen? How did that happen? Where did this come from? Who's the genius consultant that came up with that nonsense? And why are we paying this person to teach our children to be racist? So it was it just unveiled, 2020 and 2021 was just an unveiling of so many things. The teachers unions, the government systems of, the bad education that our children were getting, just how corrupt, so many institutions had become, the CDC, all of these things, like, you're just watching it like, It's just being unveiled. And then you have like, the social media port, they're like, no, they're trying to like keep the lid on, every time it's like they try to, you rip off the cover and then they're like, no, like you're banned, get out of here. And they're like, it's crazy. It's not.
I mean, all of these problems already existed in the system, right? But there was just so much transparency over the past year and a half with just how bad it actually has been, and a light bulb went off in the minds of millions of families because they were treated. They got the short end of the stick, to put it lightly, when it comes to K-12 education. But they've always gotten the short end of the stick, and the way that I would put it is that the teachers unions have awakened a sleeping giant, which happens to be these parents who just want more of a say in their kids' education. And the way that you've put it is correct, that, for all the bad that's happened over the past year and a half, there have been some good things to come out of this. And, one was the transparency, but two is, as you've put it, that there's been a mass exodus from the government school system. Parents are going to charter schools. I mean, the latest report that I've seen is that charter school enrollment has increased by 7.1%, whereas the government school enrollment dropped by 3.3%. At least 1.5 million students they've lost. Private schools in areas that had more closed schools are seeing enrollment increases. Homeschooling has at least tripled, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. The National School Board Association figured out that it's not a good idea to call parents domestic terrorists. And I don't even know if we can call them the National School Board Association anymore, because 18 states have already decided to discontinue their membership or funding. And school choice has just been on the rise. Like we've seen a lot of movement with families voting with their feet out of the school system already. Just imagine if we had all the money following the child, and we're going to see more of that going forward, because this year alone, we're calling 2021 the year of school choice. 19 states already expanded or enacted programs to fund students as opposed to systems. And the poll has been through the roof as well, with now at least 74% of Americans supporting having the money follow the child.
I love it. I love to see it. Every time I see these numbers tick up with parents exiting their children from these indoctrination camps, formerly known as schools. That's what I call them now, because I mean, there is no real education going on in most of these institutions, but it's music to my ears. I love to hear it, because if we do not educate our next generation, what are we going to have? What type of society will we have? I don't think people realize how important an educated society is. That is, you will truly have a class. You will have the ones who were able to get that education and able to actually be strategic and have the connections to move about and grow. And you'll have the rest of us, the majority of society who don't. And that is untenable. All types of things will happen if we continue down this path where parents don't have the choice to send their kids to get a better education. And like we were talking about earlier before we came on, about the teachers unions, just tell everybody what has been uncovered recently. Another uncovering.
Yeah, I mean, this is nonstop stuff. I mean, but I will point out first, just based on what you were talking about, that look, these inequities in the system have existed essentially forever in the United States. That there are good public schools that align with parents' values, and then there's crappy ones that do a bad job on every metric. And I wouldn't really even call them public schools, because they're not really open to the public. I mean, families have gone to jail for lying about their addresses, trying to get their kids into better, quote unquote, public schools. They discriminate by zip code in most states, and they can expel students. They're not really accountable to the public. Yeah, they're not really accountable to the public. They're not defined as public goods. I would call them government schools, because they're run by the government. They're funded by the government, or at least the taxpayer. They're operated and regulated by the government. They are assigned by the government. They're compelled by the government. They're government schools, not public schools. They're not like a public park, whereas if you want to stroll by and visit the park, you can do so. No, you go to jail if you go to the wrong get your kid into the wrong school because they're not public schools. But
that's a really good point.
Funding students directly would allow for more equity in the current system by allowing more families to access better educational alternatives for their kids. I mean, more advantaged families already at least have some form or are more likely to have some form of school choice in the current system. So school choice is an equalizer. And then, so like with the teachers unions, they've, it's not a surprise that they're pushing for policies that for people like me, it's not a surprise that they're pushing for policies that don't benefit students. They're not a students union. They're not a kids union. They're a teacher union. And they don't even really do a good job for teachers either, though. This year and a half, they're making them look bad. They're pushing for political crap that a lot of the teachers don't really even agree with. I mean, look at Los Angeles Teachers Union. They called for a wealth tax, Medicare for all. They wanted to ban charter schools. They want police-free schools, all before that they would even reopen their public schools. And that they kind of just let the masks slip this past year and a half. They band together with the Democratic Socialists of America on at least 2 occasions. But now we already know they lobbied to keep the schools closed. We already knew through FOIA requests over the past few months, more and more have been coming out, these emails between the CDC, the Biden administration, and the teachers unions indicating that on at least 2 occasions, the CDC adopted the language from the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten's teachers unions, nearly verbatim on at least 2 occasions. So the teachers unions essentially wrote the reopening guidelines. And why is that important? Well, it's important because they lobbied to make it more difficult to reopen the schools. Why did they do that? Because they knew that if they kept the schools closed, that would give them a better bargaining position to say, hey, in order to reopen in this district, for example, I'm going to need this, that, or the other benefits in order to go back to work in person because look, the CDC said this. And it's easier to make that argument if, the CDC says that we should keep the schools closed. And that hurts so many kids, but we already knew all that. And now the new emails revealed that there was coordination, at least consideration of these district level bargaining plans. So we already all kind of guessed that, they pushed to keep the schools closed longer because that would benefit the teachers unions and that would hold children's education hostage so that they could get some more resources. But we didn't have much, actual proof of them saying like, we should keep the schools closed because of this benefit. And one of the money quotes from the article that came out today was, we need to think about this in the broader context of teacher contract negotiations. And then another quote from the article was that another CDC official on that February 11th email exchange attached a news story regarding a Chicago teachers union contract negotiations. So again, they're in the email, and the next day, February 12th, they revised the guidelines to make it more difficult to reopen schools. I mean, so it's becoming more and more obvious that one of their considerations for changing the guidance to keep schools closed longer was, well, the teachers unions are bargaining on the ground. This might help them to get more resources. So for a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, we already kind of knew this. But at the same time, this is just more damning evidence that the unions really just sought to protect themselves at the expense of millions of families at the worst time possible when the families needed options more than ever.
Exactly. And excuse me, it's very reminiscent of the the NEA with sending the letter to the Biden administration and to get the DOJ involved with parents, shutting parents up, calling us domestic terrorists. So basically, these teachers unions, instead of it being like a country of we the people and where we are deciding what is supposed to happen with our tax dollars and our elected officials working for us and doing what we say, they have decided that they're going to pay attention to these special interest groups like teachers unions and forget what we the people want. It is that's why it is so important when these stories break and when the emails come out and you can really see what was said. I mean, same thing happened with the Department of Justice. Garland was up there. We didn't, no, this was not supposed to be about the, parents can say whatever they want to say. Oh, a couple weeks later, here's the email. Here's
a threat tag assigned to parents.
Yes. Yeah. So you lied to Congress, which I think he should resign.
Well, they should bring him back for more questioning. They won't hold another hearing. A lot of the Congress people called for another hearing since they got more information about this. And it's interesting, because at first we were just thinking, oh, the NSBA is just a horrible organization, which it is.
Yes,
because they sent the letter.
It was the NSBA. I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, they sent the letter, and then we found out later that they coordinated with the administration before they sent the letter to the Department of Justice. Whereas originally we were thinking, well, maybe it just came from them, and then the administration listened to them, or the DOJ listened to them pretty quickly and sent out their memo. But there was this coordination before all of this happened. Good thing we have FOIA request capabilities so that we can figure some of this stuff out. They redact a lot of the information, which is a pain, but at least we were able to figure this out. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. Like the teachers unions have done so much horrible stuff. Right when the schools closed in March of 2020, a lot of families started to figure out, well, maybe I can't pay for a private school, but this virtual charter school over here, which is still a public school, tuition free.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to go there because they're pretty good at the remote learning thing. They've done it for decades.
Right.
Whereas the brick and mortar public school, they didn't know what the heck they were doing. They had to put stuff together. The union started lobbying to make it illegal to switch to the virtual charter schools.
Yes.
And they admitted it was because, well, families might see that this is a better option because they've been doing it for a while and we might lose money. So they prioritized keeping the kids' money.
Yeah.
And said, screw the parents. We know that they're losing their jobs right now. A lot of problems. This is the onset of pandemic. And too bad. We're gonna force you to send your kids to our schools that aren't even open and that aren't really doing much of anything when it comes to the virtual learning either.
Yeah. Because I mean, they still, I guess, there's still some semblance of a structure. You have to have a certain amount of kids to get a certain amount of money. So they need to be able to check out the more kids that they have in the system, the more money that they can get. So they don't care. This is not like you said, it's a teachers union. It's not the children's union, which maybe we need to have a parents union, but that is exactly right. Like they had absolutely no interest in what was best for children. None.
Well, they don't have an interest for the teachers either. I mean, we point out that they're teachers unions, not kids unions. It's true. Mm-hmm. They treat the kids and families' rights horribly because they don't care about them all that much. It's not their job. But they don't push for policies that are great for teachers either with the politics. But then also their incentive as a union boss is to just put more people into the system, which costs money, obviously. And the reason that they do that is because that means more dues paying members. They have more union revenues. And then that means a stronger voting bloc by just having more people in the system. It's become a jobs program for adults as opposed to an education program for students, which is a huge problem. And it's a problem for teachers too, because what does that mean if you're a teacher in the system? Well, you could either spend that money in the classroom on the teachers that are already there, or you could spend it on the administrators, and you can spend it on just putting more people into the buildings, like we saw in Los Angeles this past year. And this has happened for decades in the U.S. This isn't anything new. Yeah, and so the teacher salaries are essentially flat. Right. So they don't see that money.
Right. Yeah. The money stays up at the top. It just stays at the top. It never gets down to, that's why teachers are having to pay, for supplies and stuff out of their own pockets. Why, if I'm spending $15,000 per child, it does not cost $15,000 to educate a child. Okay. It does not. And if you're getting all of that money per child, why in the world do teachers still have to, go and buy pencils, for God's sakes? Paper, pencils, and all these types of things for the with the money that they're not getting, that's coming from the system. It just doesn't make any sense. You would think that, I would think that more teachers would start to question and push back on the teachers unions. They're not even advocating for them to get higher pay.
Yeah, just doing quick math on that. Let's say you have a classroom of 30, 15, $450,000 per classroom. Where the hell's all the money going? Well, It's going to administrative bloat and staffing surges, which we see year after year. And nationwide, the data that I can recall off the top of my head is that between 1992 and 2014, per pupil education expenditures in the government school system jumped by 27% after adjusting for inflation, but teacher salaries dropped by 2%. So I kind of do feel bad for some of the teachers, but the problem isn't with their competition, whether it comes to private or charter schools. The problem is their employer spending the money inefficiently because they don't really have any incentive to put it into the classroom. They have an incentive to listen to the teachers unions, to just put more people into the buildings and to give the money to administrative bloat and superintendents.
Yeah, I hope teachers start pushing back. I hope they, because they should. To me, that's an incentive to push back against these teachers unions and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm paying you. That's why I'm in the union, like for you to, lobby for me to, to get better pay, to get better benefits and all these things. It's like, that's not happening. So I'm surprised actually that more teachers aren't. I'm sure there are some that are, but I'm surprised. Maybe there are some things that I just don't know.
They hear over and over again from their superintendents why, competition is bad for them and why teachers unions are so great. And they just hear that, over and over again. So, we got to combat the narrative. And, I'll just say I don't have a problem with unions per se. I have a problem with the unions in the public sector coupled with monopoly power with the district system.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if the unions push for policies that are horrible for teachers, well, the teachers don't have any other options really in terms of employment. 90% of the students are in the government run sector. And so you don't have much choice of employers. So there's a monopsony in the labor market. And if they lobby for policies that hurt kids, the kids don't have their families don't have any recourse. And so if we had all of them, that $15,000 just attached to the child, and they have a choice in where to go, well, then the unions would probably have a better incentive to push for things that aren't wasteful and to prioritize important educational resources, which happen to be the teachers in the classroom.
Yeah.
And then all of the incentives would be aligned in the right way to benefit teachers and students. And the 5 studies that I've seen on the topic, which I've summarized at the Washington Examiner in a post called School Choice Benefits Teachers Too, is that private and charter school competition leads to higher salaries for public school teachers, which is the opposite of what you'd usually hear from the teachers union narrative.
Right. With them being teachers, I would expect for them to be a little more critically thinking when they hear this nonsense from the superintendent. Oh, well, competition is bad, or, oh, that's not really going to work for us and all this stuff. Get on your Googler, do some research, do what you would tell your kid to do, fact check them to see if that's actually true. To me, it's kind of common sense, probably just because of the way I believe that economics works best. And I think societies work. I believe in competition. I think that's the best way for everybody to get what they want, basically, just sum it up like that. But if you maybe that's not your topic. Well, why don't you go and fact check these people and see if that's actually true? Be a teacher, not just for the kid, be a teacher for yourself.
But they're also in an echo chamber, right? Like all their buddies are kind of, they've bought into all this stuff. And you can't blame them all too much because they got other things to do, right? They have to do their job. And so like, this is just an additional thing to go research. And when you have so many competing sources and just like tons of information, it's kind of like information overload. And they're more likely just to listen to their trusted source, which is, their boss. It's kind of in their incentive. They have an incentive to do that, to listen to them, especially when they hear over and over again that the people putting forth the information that show that choice is actually good for the teachers, and that teachers unions are problematic for teachers. It's just so like it's one of the reasons why like democratic accountability is kind of, I would argue, is it's a form of accountability, but it's kind of a weak form of accountability because there's so many things that average voters are thinking about, and there's just so much information to look up on each and every candidate that a lot of people, they pay attention to the presidential candidate, but then, the down ballot races, they might not even know who these people are. So they just go by the party. Yep. And it causes so much problem. And it's not because the voters are dumb. And it's not like the problem here isn't that the teachers are dumb or that they're bad people. It's just they got other things to do. And it could be helpful for us to put that information more accessible and put it in front of them. And then we also have to be careful and point out that there are some teachers that understand that choice is good. There are, so it's
true, very true.
They're not all the same. So there's
absolutely.
differing
opinions. I don't mean to imply that. When you're a superintendent, they are, they're making, a lot of these superintendents make $250,000, $300,000 a year. So they're good. They're pretty much not complaining about anything. I would just think that, some of these teachers, who are on the lower earning spectrum or whatever, that maybe that is an incentive to do a little, to take a little time to do a little digging. You could benefit your family. You can increase your pay. That's certainly a lot of incentive for people. So I just hope that however it happens, whatever it needs to happen, that teachers start to take back control over, what they really care about. Because I think there are a lot of great teachers out there, and a lot of them don't want to do all this woke crap and all of this critical race theory and the queer theory and all of this nonsense. And they feel like they're in this thing and they have to do it. Maybe when more teachers leave, because there are teachers that are leaving too. Some of them are leaving because of the COVID stuff. Some of them are leaving, just because of what's going on in the school systems. And, you start your own little private school and you're starting to, you can make a very good living that way too. So I'm not mad at that at all. We need as many great teachers out here that can actually, get that understand, their students and get them to open up their minds and learn and be interested in learning and be curious and, get a good education. Learning should be fun. And a lot of teachers understand that and are trying to do that. And they just don't, it's just, unfortunately, it's not how our system has worked. It just hasn't been just beneficial for teachers or students. So, what else do you see like coming up for yourself? Like what policies are coming up maybe that are concerning or that you see that give you hope? Yeah. What else? Like what's coming up on your horizon?
So a lot of states are going to be pushing transparency bills, which I think are important because, remote learning sucked in so many ways, but the benefit there was we had a little bit more transparency with what was going on in the classroom. But now that the schools are opening more, there's, the benefit of in-person instruction, but there's the loss of transparency that we had. So it's important to try to regain some of that transparency. And one way to do it is these transparency bills calling for just the curriculum to be posted on the website in public schools. Seems pretty basic. And if you want to come out against that kind of bill, it's not going to look good for you. What are you trying to hide when it comes to what you're teaching the kids? So there's those kind of bills that I think will be beneficial, just to give parents more information. More information, the better. It's the parents will be more likely to see if the school aligns with their values or not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a perfect solution, because you can post a curriculum that says this and then still teach whatever you wanted to teach in the first place. So it's not a perfect solution. And then school choice bills, 2021 was the year of school choice, or if you're hip with the lingo by now, it's the year that we fund students, not systems.
Yeah.
I mean, there was just so much to celebrate. And the number of states with these education savings accounts, which are the gold standard of school choice, it's the purest form of funding the student directly. The number of states with those doubled this year, from 5 states to 10 states. And some of these states had just massive expansion, like West Virginia. They didn't have any charter schools or any private school choice programs in 2020. They just passed the most expansive education savings account program in the nation. So that's huge victory. But I don't think it's going to stop there. I think I'm already seeing more bills being filed for 2022. January is when, we're really going to see a lot of action. But I'm hearing from people that bills are being filed. I'm seeing bills being filed. And parents are rallying around this, because this is the best way to empower parents to choose the best education for their kids, to fund their kids directly as opposed to the system. I mean, that is the only way that we're truly going to be able to hold schools accountable from the bottom up.
I absolutely agree. And 2 days ago here in Florida, Governor DeSantis just introduced this Stop Woke legislation that's going to give parents the opportunity to legally push back against teachers and administration or schools that are trying to push, critical race theory. So I think that's another layer of that transparency, where they're going to have to, if parents see something, you're going to have to be accountable for that. If there's some evidence of something going on somewhere, we're going to have to be accountable for that. Yeah, I think our natural, for me as a conservative, my natural instinct is to push back on more law, because I'm like, ooh, more law. But in this instance, I think it's something that has been ignored, and clearly something that we were missing. I think this is a really good, this is legislation that I definitely get behind, because the psychological abuse that happens when children are being told that they're oppressors or oppressed, or they are, responsible for, something that happened 200 years ago, or they are victims of something that happened 200 years ago, or whatever it is, the hypersexualization, the comprehensive, sexual education, all of these things that are totally destructive to the human being. It is destructive to human beings. And that is legislation that I can certainly get behind, even though I'm, every time I don't want more law, I want less government, but this is something that I'm really proud of. And so what do you think about the Stop Woke? Have you had a chance to look at it?
I haven't read through the actual legislation, but I've seen these kinds of bills being introduced in other states and passed in other states already. I think New Hampshire just did something like this. Texas might have done it already. I think that I'm kind of hesitant to support this kind of stuff, just because I don't want to give the power to the government to decide what should be taught in the kids' school. I see the intentions of the rules. But I also, even if your goal is to reduce CRT in the classroom, I don't know if it's going to achieve that goal to the best, to the extent that parents might want it to achieve that goal. Because in other states, we're hearing teachers just kind of say, oh, we'll just call it, social emotional learning instead of CRT. Or, the curriculum might not have it, but we might still teach through a CRT lens in the math class. And so I think the better approach, and, this might be a step in the right direction if that is your goal, but I don't think it is the optimal solution, which I think is just allowing parents to vote with their feet, regardless of their income level, give the full funding to the child, and, maybe try a two-pronged approach. Maybe you try this, and then if it doesn't actually work out, also have that exit option just in case, if it gets so bad in the public school and they don't actually listen and they're not actually listening to the law, well, then families need to have that exit option at the same time. And that should incentivize the public schools to be less politically motivated and to just focus on the basics, I think, because the more divisive they are, the more likely that families would vote with their feet to exit.
Yeah.
I kind of mixed views on that, but I know DeSantis is a huge champion of school choice at the same time.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
Florida's already leading the way on school choice, which is great, but they should totally universal
blow it open.
Boom.
I'm with you. I think we should blow it open. I think he's trying to do a two-pronged approach, for parents who don't have, who feel like they don't have those options. I think we have many more options than what we realize. I am fully mass exited out of the public school system. I do not have any children in the public school system anymore. So I am very happy with that. I think I do. I understand where you're coming from. I totally understand where you're coming from, because I think one thing that I do that is concerning with this new legislation is that it might give a false sense of security. Like, okay, well, now we can do this and we don't really have to pay attention anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, now that there's a law there, well, somebody else will, if there's something going on, somebody else. We tend to do that as human beings. We'll kind of just like, okay, well, there's a law. So, so there is no perfect solution, but I think you do. I am certainly for mass exiting. I am like, I'm done. I don't know when it's going to take time for this legislation to actually get into the system. It's going to take, for me, I don't have time to wait for the government to, do all the legislation and do all those things while my kid is under this tyranny. I just don't, but I do think it's a step in the right direction for the parents who are still in that system. It's at least it gives them something.
Yeah. Another piece of this is that, it really exposes how the problems with the system is that it's one size fits all, right? Like the curriculum disagreement is one piece of that puzzle, right? It's one of the problems that's inherent in that one size fits all system, is that people are going to disagree about what the curriculum should be. And that's always going to be a problem, whether it's CRT, sex ed, or something else. It's always going to be an issue because people disagree about how their kids should be raised. And that's okay. And, the other issue might be whether you have a mask mandate in your school. Maybe you have a vaccine mandate in your district to go to school. Maybe you have a certain type of bullying or discipline policy that maybe the parent disagrees with. There's so many different reasons as to why you might not be okay with your kid's public school. Yeah. And I think that's why the bottom up solution is the best solution, not a perfect solution, but it allows parents to make these choices based on all these different disagreements that can arise in the current system. I do want to point out one other thing that I think is really interesting. And I know there are bills floating around already on this topic, and there are going to be more that'll be filed. But for the most part, school choice bills, having the money follow the child, only is associated with the state dollars, which is about half of the total dollars. And most states that have school choice, that's what they just do it at the state level. Yeah. But in New Hampshire right now, they have a bill. They already passed the state level program. They call them education freedom accounts because, live free or die state. Yeah. But now they're pushing for local education freedom accounts. So you allow your locality to opt in to allow the local funding to also follow the child, or one or the other. I think this bill would either be you opt in for the local funding or the state funding. It happens to be in New Hampshire that on average, the local funding's a higher dollar amount than the state funding. And so now you can have more of that funding following the child in the future. And I think this is a really interesting approach that I haven't really seen before this year, to have the local funding following the child. So that kind of excites me too, that there's these other solutions that states are looking, especially states that have a low state share. So like New Hampshire, they spend like $19,000 per kid, but the state share on average is only $4,600. It's less than a third. It's like a quarter. So like if you're in a state where you have a low state share, where it's a step in the right direction, but it's still only 4,600. Maybe if there's a way to get the local funding, you can get closer to that. But maybe depends on how they write the bill, but maybe $12,000 per kid, so that more of the funding can follow the child. And Florida could do something similar.
That's really interesting. I'm not sure like what the local share. I know I feel like our property taxes are highly, that's a large portion of that goes to our education. So I'm pretty sure that's how it works in Florida. But
it's probably like 50-50 state local. I mean, we're like 10%. On average, it's like 10% federal, 45-45 local state. Okay. But there are some states like New Hampshire where it's like, very really low state.
Yeah. Okay. But that's interesting. I'm gonna look into that and see like what is our percentage. And it makes me think too about how more important it is that we pay attention to our local government. Like you were saying earlier, we have so many people that only pay attention to the national elections, and it's like that is so far from what affects your everyday life. Like you need to know like who your city council person is, who your school board members are, who your superintendents are typically appointed by the board, but you need to pay attention to who these local people are, but because that's what's going to more so affect you, your taxes, your children's education. Those seats, those elected officials are very close to you and can really decide what your everyday life will be like. So yeah, that's super important. Gosh, you've given so many good things to think about, Corey. No wonder you were such a star at Freedom Works.
It was a lot of fun meeting you. Hopefully you'll be back in DC soon. I'm stuck here all the time because I live here, but I might be in Florida in January, so maybe I'll see you in an event there or something. But it's good talking to you. And
yes, good to talk to you.
It was a pleasure to be on your podcast, and very happy that you invited me to be on.
Thank you so much. I am so grateful that you said that you accepted my invitation. So thank you.
All right. Yeah. Have a good one, Quisha.
You too. Thanks.